I was full, okay? Like my shame cup was
nowhere to go.
Was overflowing, and it just had to come out. It had to come out.
Welcome back to Recovery APN. My name is Dan, and I'm joined by my co-host Andy.
Hey, pal, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. This has been a really exciting process for us, huh?
It has. It's cool to come out to campus and see Colorado and see APN. Big Colorado news this week, though. Did you see the Avalanche lost in game 5 last night to the Lightning? So all the Coloradians are on there. They're crying about the lightning bolts.
So what's the series now?
It's 3-2 but it's going back to Tampa for game 6.
And it seems like you're a big hockey fan.
Not really, but I just like to see people were fired up at the hotel last night about the game.
Well, let me ask you a question. How many minutes of the game did you watch last night?
I would say 2 to 3 minutes of the 60 minutes of the game I watched.
So I'm so glad you brought this up as if like you're a huge fan.
Huge fan. I'm a fake hockey fan. I watch ESPN and read the little blog.
No, listen, I think for any hometown, right, to go there and their team be in the finals is exciting, right? So to your point, like going back to the hotel and seeing these people, like even our one of the APN drivers yesterday was wearing
he had a jersey on. There's a high level of intensity around here. I love it.
It was great. It was great.
Little ADD there.
No, I love it. Listen, lightens it up a little bit. So we have another exciting guest on today.
Absolutely.
And what's unique about this guest, right, and I'll talk about APN as a whole first, is when you talk about APN, right, we're not just a substance abuse treatment center, right? We have the ability to focus on clients that are struggling with mental health as well. So individuals coming maybe don't have that substance abuse problem. And, we're fortunately to joined by an alumni that came to APN for mental health.
And I think on the alumni side, when we do alumni activities and events, that we don't cater just to, substance abuse. Oh, you don't have that? Hey, good luck, right? We try to, we want everybody to come to our alumni events, and we don't want to just have it for mental health and trauma. We don't want to just have it for addiction. We want to have it we want to be broad and like all inclusive kind of deal.
Absolutely. And when I talk about, and I use the word mental health, right? Like, what does that mean, right? It could be someone dealing with trauma. It could be someone dealing with anxiety. It could be someone dealing with depression, PTSD, and all this stuff, right? And we're fortunate enough to have specialists at APN that focus on that, right?
Absolutely.
And so, like, I'm curious in this podcast too to hear more about it, because I know in previous episodes we've spoke to other alumni that have come to APN for that substance abuse. So to hear that other perspective and working with our staff here that focuses on that mental health piece is something very intriguing to me.
And again, to piggyback on that, I'd say in the last 10 years, especially since COVID, mental health in this country and trauma has become more of a discussed topic. It's not something that only a couple people hear about, right? It's more you hear it in everyday through jobs and through kids in schools, and it's everywhere. It's more accepted to talk about, and it needs to be discussed and it needs to be worked on. So we're at APN, we're pumped to be working on it.
And I say this in the best way possible. It's almost like a buzzword now.
It is.
It's
absolutely.
like, people were so scared to talk about, like, I have anxiety, right? Or I am depressed, or I had this, big T, little t trauma going back, and like embarrassed to share those stories. And now people are talking about, like, yes, I was traumatized as a child, and this is how it's affected my daily life, and they're willing to work on it.
Absolutely. Because again, our first couple of guests, we were talking about alcohol a lot, but that was always the symptom of the problem. And it's about getting underneath of that problem. And a lot of times it is a small T or a big T, or small trauma, big trauma underneath of that, which is pushing the addiction or the unhealthy coping abilities that we pick up.
You like how I threw in big T, little t?
Yeah, you're killing it, pal.
That's big, right? It's things I worked on.
Yeah, don't worry. Still got to do that work, pal.
No, and it's interesting, right? And
you're not done.
Yeah, I know. And
hashtag you're not done.
And it's scary to define your life experiences as trauma. I know when I was going through treatment, they would ask me, right, like, did you have any trauma growing up? I'd be like, no. Like, what do you mean no? Look at me. I don't have trauma. And like, I thought it was such a powerful word. But when you like unpack everything, like there were things in my life that like would be considered traumatizing. And like, it's okay.
I worked with a therapist in the past, and they described trauma as if I take a sledgehammer to a wall and I swing at it, it's going to put a huge hole in that wall. Right. And which is big trauma, right? It's a car accident. It's something an intense situation, right? Or for 20 years, if I took 80 grit sandpaper and I rubbed the same spot of the wall, both walls are going to look the same, right? There's going to be a huge hole, right? So, but those small traumas are very difficult to identify and to even know that they happened without help. And they are running our lives today a lot of times. So again, I'm pumped to hear our guest story and hear, you know, how he's dealing with that and what got him to APN and his journey to health and balance and recovery.
100%. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest today, Peter.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
What's up, pal? How you doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm sitting here with you.
Yeah. What a gift, right? What a gift. How was the drive up? I heard you were with another alumni.
Yes, Katie and I drove up together.
How was the
we're doing our part for the clean air in Colorado and reducing the traffic on I-70.
There we go.
And Katie's a joy to spend a couple hours in the car with.
That's
She's
awesome.
got a lot to talk about,
That's
and she's very entertaining.
She said that you were actually talking the whole time, but anybody that just heard Katie's podcast know that Katie might have been doing a lion's share of the talking there.
Yeah, for sure. And I was sitting out there listening, and I'm like, oh, I got to follow up this act. Oh my god, right?
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
No, so yeah, as I was just kind of chatting with Andy, right? It's interesting because a lot of the people that we speak to on the podcast, right, other alumni talk about substance abuse and their addiction history. And what excites me most about this, right, is to learn your journey from the mental health standpoint. So what we typically do, right, is we'll get into like what brought you to APN and all that stuff, but like I want to make sure that like everyone has a clear understanding of like your story, right? And again, sometimes the decision of coming to APN is based off of one big moment, or it's based off of like many different events that happened from your childhood up until you came. So I want to kind of put the ball in your court so people can get more familiar with you and your story leading up to kind of you coming to APN and be willing and accepting of getting help here.
Yeah, thanks. You know, talking about big T, little t, I've definitely had my share of both. But in looking at it, you know, looking at big T, there's definitely a moment I can look back in my life and say, okay, this was a pivotal moment in my life that really steered my ship and kind of dictated where I went. I was in my early 20s. I was in college. I was a recreational drinker, recreational marijuana smoker, and I had a bad acid trip. The quintessential bad trip, like no joke. I'm at a Grateful Dead concert.
I was literally about to ask where you were at a concert.
Like it's almost stereotypical,
Yeah,
right?
right?
Like, but a quintessential bad trip, right?
It was Grateful Dead or Fish, right?
Yeah.
Right, exactly, right? So this is like 2 days before my 22nd birthday, okay? About 2 weeks later, I'm back. I was on spring break. About 2 weeks later, I'm back on campus at school, and I smoke weed, and all of a sudden I'm tripping again.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, what is going on here, right? Wake up the next day, I'm feeling a little groggy, but I'm generally okay. Run into the guy on campus that I was smoking with the night before, and I'm like, you're not gonna believe what happened to me. And he's like, well, you know, what do? Go and smoke more weed, right?
Yeah, of course.
Wake up the next day, and I am tripping balls.
Ugh.
And it lasted about 90 days.
So anytime that like you would smoke weed,
The psychosis.
it would just like bring back the tripping.
I never smoked weed again after that. That was the last time I smoked weed.
Wow.
I started tripping, and I basically went into a flashback state, and I didn't know what to do. I was in a living a bad trip. I was literally, it is the closest I've ever come to or been able to understand of living hell.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
This is 1993. Mental health at that point is certainly not something that's, you know, is mainstream.
Like today.
Yeah, as it is today.
Yeah.
So I am drawing at straws, trying to find out where to go. I find a counselor on campus who basically didn't know what to do for me, but kind of was like, hey, you know what? We're seeing a lot of what you're displaying is we're seeing a lot of the guys your age coming back from Desert Storm with something called PTSD.
Oh, wow.
And I'd never heard that term before,
no.
right? You know, I mean, that really came up big like after Vietnam. And now, like this guy said, we're seeing this with a lot of, you know, because I had a lot of guys on campus that I knew who were in ROTC and stuff and got called up for Desert Storm.
And they used to call it like shell shock back in
Exactly.
like the 70s.
That's exactly right. And so I said, okay, so how do I make this stop? Because I am in my, you know, I'm in my second semester senior year. It's late March, and I've got finals coming up. I've got papers. I've got my senior
finish
thesis.
line.
I've got my senior thesis to do, and I am like tripping balls from the moment I wake up till when I go to bed. And every morning I would wake up and I would before I opened my eyes, I would pray to God that it would be over, and it wasn't over. And so this guy and I kind of came up with this theory that the marijuana had triggered this, okay? And it was possible that as long as the marijuana was in my system, this was going to continue, okay? So I thought, okay, 30 days or so to get marijuana out of my system. I've got to hang on and just survive for 30 days, okay? So I'm going about my life and I'm doing this and I'm barely making it, right? And I'm still around a lot of people. You know, everybody in my circle is, you know, smokes weed and does drugs and stuff like that, you know, and I started to get a little bit better. It started to ease. And then one day I was at home and people were smoking weed and I got a sniff of weed and I was right back there.
Oh, wow.
What I didn't know then, which I know now, is I was having panic attacks.
Yeah.
Okay. And they were being generated by this basically taking me back to this traumatic moment that I had with this bad trip and then this flashback. And every time I would smell marijuana now I am like tripping again. I have a panic attack and I'm tripping again.
In that reactive state.
Exactly right. So I'm so on edge that I'm, you know, that the littlest thing is pushing me over.
Yeah.
So I basically develop a phobia for the smell of marijuana and for anything that can change my mindset. Okay. I wouldn't take Tylenol, certainly not drink any alcohol or marijuana or anything like that. So this is where my life is going. Over the course of like maybe towards late summer, I start to kind of feel quote unquote a little bit normal again. But I basically made a promise to my God at the time that, look, if I get through this, I will never, ever do another drug again, right? Just get me through this. Let me survive this.
Firm resolution.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I came through it, but I wasn't really whole after that. I developed a lot of kind of psychological issues, had kind of a bad bout of OCD for a while there, where I became terrified that I was going to get dosed with LSD, right?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because a thought came into my head, right? It's like you're 22 years old, right? Now it's like you've developed this sensation of like anytime you smell or even probably talk about like marijuana, right, those panic attacks come out. So you must have had to change your entire lifestyle while you were at college.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right. So that's like difficult for a 22-year-old to understand, like being in college, right? Walking into a room, like your boys or these girls are smoking weed. It's like no big deal. Now it's like you're walking in, it's like the anxiety's already coming up and it's like, are they smoking? Do I walk in? Do I not? Like now it's like, does it turn into isolation?
Very true. And, you know, I tell you, you find out real quick who your friends are when you stop doing something or when you realize, hey, this was only my friend because we smoke weed together or we went drinking together, you know, that kind of thing. But what you also find out is you find out there are other people out there because they're like, man, I always just had you pegged as like a stoner, you know, kind of thing. And I kind of, you know, kind of steered clear of your crowd and things like that. And so when I started telling people, hey, I'm not doing that anymore, for the people that left, they were more than filled up with the people that came in that were like, good for you. Wish I could do what you're doing. How you do it, you know, blah, 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 that kind of thing. So, but yeah, it was a huge life change for me because I couldn't go to concerts anymore. I tried to go to a concert a couple of years after that and in the middle of the show, got a huge whiff of pot and went bolting for the doors in a full-on panic attack. So, but that was kind of this, you know, very pivotal event in my life that really, you know, led me into other things and developed into something else, both in good and bad ways. So I got better over a couple of years, and I was able to socialize again, and I was able to, you know, hang out with people and go to bars again, that kind of thing. But then about 3 years later, I was at work one day, and all of a sudden, boom, I am tripping balls again. I'm right back there. And I had to leave work, go home, and pin myself in my apartment, be like, what's going on? What's going on? At the time, my sister was a third-year law student. And unbeknownst to me, she started having panic attacks, which apparently are very common with third-year law students, fourth-year med students, okay, when the stress is really on, okay? She being very type A and overachieving, she dove into this as far as, as hard as she could. It was actually wound up being on the Oprah show for an episode about panic attacks, because her therapist was the most renowned person in the in the country at the time, and wrote the book on panic attacks and that kind of thing. So she said, okay, I know what's happening to you. And I said, you don't know. I got to tell you all this stuff about happening in college. She goes, okay, that's fine. I'll listen to you. And she listens. That's great. But what's happening to you now is panic attacks. And so
this is your sister or her doctor?
This is my older sister. Yeah. And so I got into a group program at that point, but I had to quit my job.
And what year is this? Like 99, 2000?
This is 1997.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I got into a group therapy for panic and generalized anxiety disorder. And that's when things really started kind of getting bad for me with, I got really phobic about touching certain things or, being out of control. I was really afraid. I thought that I'd gotten dosed again, basically. I thought that's why this was happening. And so I developed this OCD that was like, if I touched the railing on the L going, walking up the steps to catch the train or something, I was going to touch something. If I got food that was takeout food, like it could have, because you hear these stories, urban myths, whatever they may be. But so I developed, so now I have this whole other thing going on with panic and anxiety and some OCD, and I'm just living in fear. Everything, like my whole life is one little tiny cell of fear that I live in, and it completely crippled me socially, professionally, mentally and psychologically. So I kind of went down, I said, okay, I've got to go through this. And what I started to find out was that it was familial, that my mom and my maternal grandmother both had really bad panic disorder.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. Wanted to ask you, right? When you were going through this at a young age, 22, like in college, right? Did you ever reach out to any family members and kind of like elaborate what you were going through for to hear? And because like my thought process was like, if you did, again, I don't know, but if you did, maybe like your mom or someone would say like, you know what, I went through that also.
Yeah, you know what, I didn't. And I knew my mom had some mental health issues. There was some of that stuff growing up. We were a family of 5, and I knew mom had a lot of postpartum depression after the last 2 pregnancies and miscarriages. So I knew that was there, but it certainly, we weren't a family. We were a close-knit family, but the world that my mom and dad came from weren't ones in which you talk about this stuff. Yeah. My mom's mother, my maternal grandmother, was one of 13 children.
Wow.
And of those 13, my grandma was the only one that married. The rest of them were all born, raised, and died in the same house. And all the men were raging alcoholics. Okay. So that's where she came from. This weird world where you don't talk about stuff, very incestual, very xenophobic, Polish people who, spoke Polish in the home.
Yeah.
And so that really, our family was really close and tight, but my brothers and sisters and I were, but I was like, I don't know who to talk to about this. My brothers were way too young at the time for me to reach out to them with it. They're 8 and 13 years younger than me. So I had my older sister, so that was great. But I was kind of going through that alone. And, to this day, my parents have not heard this story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Certainly not the college story.
Yeah.
They knew what was going on with me at when I was 25 and I was in group therapy for the panic and the anxiety. But it was, it was very much, at arm's length.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
So, let's fast forward. So from 2000 to 2020, were you just dealing with this, like good years, bad years, or was it like constant, or did you get free from it at some point?
Well, like a lot of people with mental health, I was doing it when there was a critical need for it. Yeah. And then I would get better.
Sure,
and I'd be feeling good, then I would stop my therapy, right? Yeah. But I mean, I've had a number of different therapists over the years, and They've been very helpful, but I never really got to the trauma thing until I got to APN.
And not to stop you too, but it was funny because the last pod we did, generational trauma came up, and how it just repeats itself and it repeats itself and it repeats itself. So to break that cycle and to have the opportunity to break that cycle, A, is difficult, but B, is necessary almost.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very true.
Yeah.
So what happened to me is I wound up being completely sober from 22 to 30. But when I was 30, I decided, okay, I'm tired of still living in kind of this prison that I've created for myself. I have all these fears and things like that. Like I'd be afraid if I'd eat like, you know, an entree that had white wine in it, that the wine would trigger a flashback. Okay. So this is going to sound completely ridiculous, but I wound up doing what used to be called immersion therapy, which now I think they call exposure therapy for alcohol.
Oh, wow.
I was so terrified of alcohol that if I had one sip of alcohol that I would start tripping, that I was like, this is unhealthy. Yeah. This is unhealthy for me.
Crippled by it.
Exactly right.
Crippled.
It was dictating my life.
Yeah.
It was controlling my life. So I sat down one day and with a friend, and I just had a sip of beer. And I'd made this thing up in my mind, like if I'd eaten something, it would take 45 minutes to an hour for acid to kick in.
Right.
Okay. Because that was my experience with acid, right? So I'm like, okay, if I'm going to start tripping, or if I'm dosed, this is how long it's going to take. So this is my mindset. So I sat there and I muscled through like a quarter of a beer. And I sat there and I was like, okay,
waited an hour.
Okay, nothing
Like
nothing
44
happened.
minutes, 43 minutes.
Exactly.
42 minutes.
Right, exactly.
All right, it's about to hit.
Yeah. And nothing happened. So I was like, okay, so over the course of the next...
It's like a weed brownie. Sorry.
Yeah.
In my experience.
Yeah. So over the course of the next 5 or 8 years, I kind of started casually drinking again, like a half a drink here, a toast of champagne, right, at a wedding or
glass of
New
wine,
Year's, that kind of thing. And I, became kind of a social drinker again. But I've always had, but because of that experience, I kind of have this built-in braking system where my body won't let me. One, it doesn't crave it. And two, it won't let me drink that much.
Oh, wow.
And as I've gotten older, the recovery is brutal. Like a couple of drinks on a Friday night, and I'm not really feeling right again until like Monday.
Yeah.
So it's been kind of a built-in thing for me.
Okay.
Yeah. I will say, when it came time for me to come to a place like APN, when that realization hit, I wasn't drinking, but my life had become unmanageable.
Yeah.
And I took both my brothers, I mentioned in long-term recovery, both big in AA, okay, and both younger than me, both got into it, in their early 30s, basically, into sobriety. And now here I am, I'm 50 years old, and I'm realizing I can't function the way I need to be functioning. And I'm isolating, and I live alone, and so I asked my brother, go for a walk with me, and I said, we're walking around the park, and I said, I need help. I just can't do it by myself anymore. And he looked at me and he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, I've often wished through the years that you had the gift of addiction.
Yeah.
He said, if you had become an addict like I did, you would have dealt with this shit a long time ago.
Yep.
Instead, I was the one that was kind of the older brother, caring for everybody, taking care of them and their shit while they were going down. Each one of my brothers has come and lived with me at one low point in their life, right? And
there's some purpose in that too.
And I've employed both of them, in the past, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And now I'm the one, like, hey, I am failing, and I am stumbling.
What an interesting concept, and I agree with your brother 1,000%, right? Because addiction would have brought you to your knees probably pretty quick, and then you can address the trauma and the panic attacks and the mental health stuff behind all of it. But without the addiction, it's like, well, hey, I'm okay, like I'm hanging. I just got to work on X, Y, or Z, and then I'm 50 all of a sudden,
right?
Yeah,
it's interesting. I think we spoke about this earlier this morning, maybe outside the room, but it was like the difference in bottoms between someone that's struggling with substance abuse and alcohol or mental health, right? Like, and to call it like very like plain and black and white, right? With substance abuse and with substance abuse or alcohol, right? It's like an overdose, right? It's, you know, maybe getting arrested, maybe it's a DUI, maybe it's something that's huge variable.
Drunk
right? Like,
at work.
you could see it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that with mental health, right? Like, they're both equally as bad, but
more
like
subtle.
But I think, to your point, it's more subtle, and like you have the ability to hide it outside your body, like more. And so it's like interesting to hear kind of like what brings you like to your knees. Like I put it in air quotes, like what brings you to your knees in mental health, right? Because of like, again, I don't have that experience, but like it has to be a similar experience in a different methodology.
Yeah, certainly. And for me, it got to the point where basically my trauma, and what I didn't know at the time was that I didn't realize how important it was. There was some sexual childhood trauma that was really playing an impact on my shame and my self-esteem and things like that. And
which then kicked the panic attacks.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So my body was dealing with it in different ways, but I've always had, you know, different weird, like little, not diseases, but body, you know, problems with my body, like with like breathing, like I've been asthmatic and you know, I've had sinus surgeries and I've had weird stomach issues and things like that. And so, you know, one of the really cool things for me was that when I first got to APN, someone had kind of read my intake and they left a book in my room. And this was during COVID, and we were confined to our rooms for 7 days, right?
The body keeps the score?
Body keeps the score. Right. So this book is there, and I'm like 2 pages into this book, and I'm like, oh my God, this is me, right? This is absolutely me.
So let's take a step back, and I want to hear that part.
Was it How I Knew the Name of the Book? Is that what you want to talk about?
No. For everyone know, Andy is starting to be a therapist. As you can see, he's on point today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to him directly,
one
and
therapist.
he will cure you.
One therapist said, "Oh, the body keeps the score. The body keeps the score." I used to hear it all the time. It's true.
Who's the author?
Oh, but I have no idea.
Bessel van der Kolk.
Yeah, it's van der Kolk.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I guess like I want to hear about like the experience of making. So you spoke to your brother, right? I need help, right? So now it's like you guys, you're getting the support you need. It's like how was APN found? You know, why did you pick APN? And like I want to hear about like even like when you get to APN, like what was that experience like?
Sure. So I was working with a therapist at the time. Great guy. He was really helping me. He was had done a lot of work around trauma. He had been at the VA for like 8 years before he went on his own in private practice, and so he really was helping me delve into the trauma. And so I, you know, in talking with him, I said, look, I feel like I need to do something really intensive. I like this work we're doing, and I see where we're going with this, but I am struggling right now, and I need something stronger.
I want
so,
more.
Yeah. So he actually was the one who found APN for me. And again, it's not that easy of a thing. It's super easy, obviously, to find substance and addiction places, but the trauma component is a whole nother thing. And so that was part of the kind of kind of the process that we went through of finding a good place for me. And he was like, hey, here's a phone number. I don't know anybody up there, but a friend of mine who's a therapist knows them. Here's a woman's number named Carrie. Call this woman. So I call Carrie Campos, and she pulls over on the side of the road, and she's talking to me, and she's like, we can absolutely help you. And so, within 4 or 5 days, I was packing my bag and on my way up here. So,
shout out Carrie Campos.
Right. I mean, amazing. So, talking about someone who's, not only on the right bus, but on the right seat on the bus, right? But it was a struggle for me to obviously, have that admit that to myself, that, okay, this is where I need to go. I'm 50 years old. I've always done my own thing, right? I've never, had to ask for this kind of help.
I help others. I take care of others.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So here I am, but it was, once I finally decided to do it, it was a huge relief off my shoulders. Like mentally, it was like, okay, I'm going to put myself in their hands. And my attitude from the moment I walked in the door was, okay, I'm going to be here for 28 days, which is what I, set up to do. I want to get every last bit of it as I can. So I really came into it like I'm I'm here of my own volition. I want to do this, and this is long overdue, and I'm going to take, and it's a luxury that I'm able to do this, and it's a gift. And I'm going to make the absolute most of every minute while I'm here.
And dove into everything we offered.
Exactly.
That's
right.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you get to the lodge, right? You're motivated, you're pumped, right? You kind of like, you're at your bottom, right? But you're willing, and you know that it gets better, right? And you're willing to do the work. I guess, what was the first experience you had? Like, how were you feeling when you got here? And also, like, let's go back to like kind of the story that I cut you off with, right? Where it was like, you get to your room, there's a book there, and you automatically connect to the lodge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was a huge turning point. And that was also, you know, obviously coming in, it's like, is this the right place for me? Okay. Is it just going to be, and I'd asked a lot of questions before coming in about what the group was like. Am I going to be with people who are addicts? And, you know, and are people going to have, you know, similar experiences to me or whatnot? And walking in and having that be right there was like immediate affirmation that, yes, I'm in the right place. I'm in the right place. And I dove into that book, and it was quarantine. We were in quarantine. So I was in my room for, you know, 23 hours a day. We were out for 45 minutes a day for a walk around the neighborhood, weather permitting, because it's January.
Right.
And you're doing stuff by Zoom, but I'm like, I'm going to do everything that I can. So I'm like, I'm working out in my room. I'm eating, doing all the healthy meals because, you know, I wanted to eat healthy. I wanted to, you know, fuel my body in a positive way and get everything that I could out of it. So, you know, on the walks, I'm talking to other people for the first time, and I'm hearing a lot of, you know, how long do I have to be here?
Yeah. This
kind of thing, like grumbling, you know. And my attitude coming in was, look, I'm coming in to fix myself. I'm not coming in to fix anything, you know, or anybody else, you know, or anything about this place. People are naturally complaining about things. The food sucks.
Sure.
And I'm like, first of all, the food's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's always people, and God bless it, where people are at, but there's always, you know, it's easy for me to stay in the victim role, and that stuff's always happening to me, right? And a lot of times we come across that in this industry, but it's great that you're able to, like, hey, I hear you, God bless you, but this is what I'm working on, and I have a path that I want to go down, and I want to work on myself, and that's great that you're able to see that.
Yeah, and it really, on the one hand, yes, like little pat on my back for, you know, doing the work, but I had no other choice, really. Yeah. I mean, my body was breaking down because of the toll the trauma was taking on, the unresolved trauma was taking on me. All these things that I'd kicked out, you know, been kicking the can for years,
down the road.
Yeah, and I can remember, you know, in my group here, in our trauma group, you know, the age range was like from 20 to 65 maybe. So a pretty wide range of, you know, and at one point, you know, a couple of the older guys and you know, and I said to a younger guy who was really struggling, said, dude, give yourself a lot of credit for doing this now in your 20s when you've got everything. Like, I wish I was here in my 20s, right? You know, I think about the time, and I have no regrets about my life, and I don't believe in wasted time, but I look back and I think, wow, I could have done a lot more if I'd gotten into this earlier.
It's so funny, right? It's something that was like said to me a lot, is that like when I was struggling with substance abuse and mental health, substance abuse primarily, and I would go to meetings in my late 20s, the older generation in the rooms would be like, you're so lucky you're here at a young age, right? Like you're the lucky one. And then, like, obviously in what my brain was like, are you kidding me? Like, I have to stop drinking at 27. Like, how am I the lucky one? I can't drink when I'm 30, 40, 50, right? And that didn't click for me until when I was here, right? And I had the same experience, right? Where, like, there was, like, a 20-year-old here that was here for substance abuse, right? And I'm looking at him only at like 33 years old, and I'm saying that to him, right? Because you get to live a life where it's like you're not walking around with all this weight on your shoulders, right? And from your example, right, trauma, not dealing with the trauma from my perspective, like the drugs and alcohol, but you get to live a free life, right? And like I had to go through 33 years of walking around with this weight on my shoulders.
Well, I also think with that, and this is common in recovery, mental health, substance abuse, but like when I'm if someone's passed and they're recovered and they're healthy and they're describing it to somebody that's not there, it's such a foreign concept. And like, it's me describing to somebody, hey, this is what a rose smells like, but they've never seen a rose, they've never smelled a rose. It's impossible. You can't put words to what recovery feels like internally. So when I'm a new guy, I'm like, and they're like, oh, your life will be great. I'm like, shut up, pal. You know, like, what are you talking about, right? And that's like the mindset until we get to that point and you're able to do the work like you talked about.
Yeah, that's it. And I think, you know, like, I think for a lot of us, it's, you know, the idea is, okay, I'm gonna fix this, and then I'm gonna be done, right?
Yeah,
then I'm gonna
graduate.
Then I'm gonna be, then I'm gonna be healthier.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be, you know, cured. Then I'm done. And that's kind of how I had gone through things with my life a lot. Like, okay, I've got this problem that I need to solve, and then once I solve this immediate acute issue that I have, then I'm okay. I wasn't really dealing with the chronic part of it, and it's just been building up and building up over years, and it was taking its toll the whole time, and just, you know, I'm looking back at, you know, I look back on my successes, but more often I look back on my failures, and I think about, okay, maybe that's why that happened. And if I had put this effort in, put the work in beforehand, you know, it'd be a little bit different. One of the biggest, I would say, concepts that I came out of APN with from my therapist, Julie, was the idea of sustained effort, right? Is that you can't, you know, this can't happen overnight, right? And you get to a point where you've changed because of your experiences, because of who you are, and how you've lived your life and whatnot. And some of these things are behind you, and it's hard to let some of those things go. Like, you know, your buddies that you used to party with, and you think, God, what's my life going to be like? It's scary. It's an unknown. What's my life going to be like without this? But then you come out of it and you're like, you know what? I feel really good. My head is clear. I have much more self-awareness, and one of the things I will say about going back to when I look back on, you know, that flashback and all that stuff, is it was definitely I looked at it as a curse, but it's a blessing really now when I look back at it. It's made me a much more compassionate person, a much more empathetic person, someone who can really relate to suffering and pain and you know, tragedy. But there's also a lot of what I had to deal with a lot at APN was a lot of the shame, knowing that I did this to myself in a lot of ways. And so I was really beating myself up over the years a lot for having, in my mind, ruined my life because of my drug usage. Okay. Not knowing that I was kind of predetermined towards some of this stuff because of my family history. You know, had I known that, I probably would have steered clear of, you know, drugs a little bit more. But you know what? I've had to go through a lot of self-forgiveness on it because I've been beating myself up for years for, in my mind, you know, ruining my life.
No, it's crazy. You talked about your therapist here, Julie. Kind of curious, you know, you spent, you know, this 4 or 5 weeks here as a client. Thinking back to it, was there an individual or individuals that really like stood out to you and really impacted your stay here and done anything like that you remember or something that you hold to value?
You know, she definitely comes top of mind to me, and I think it's a little bit comical because during my first intake session with her, I was thinking, I don't know if she's right for me. I had been in a couple. I hadn't had any exposure to her yet, whereas I'd been on some group therapy calls with some of the other therapists, and I thought, wow, this one I really like this person. I think this person. I hope I get this person. Right. But you know, by this point in life, I think I've had 5 or 6 different therapists over the years, so I have a sense for who I can, you know, who works well with me. But my initial reaction was, I don't know if this is the right fit, and I almost thought about changing. I said, no, you know what? I'm not gonna fight it. I'm gonna believe in the system and believe in the organization. They know who to pair people. And she wanted to be the perfect fit for me.
It's unbelievable when we take our hands off the wheel, right? You know, like. there's an expression about like taking, you know, like in AA, there's the third step, and it's about, hey, letting go and trusting that I'm okay, right? And it's like riding your bike without hands, right? And you're riding down a flat paved road, and everything's great. Hey, I let go, right? But anytime there's a bump or a turn, what do? I grab hold, and we talked about it yesterday. We talked about it earlier. When I'm in charge, I usually crash, right? You know, like I have to trust that I'll be okay, and that I'm okay right where I'm at. I'm perfectly imperfect right where I'm at.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And you know, for me, and the way that my brain works, it's like I get uncomfortable when things are good. Yeah. Okay, I am most in my comfort zone when things are not going so well, when it's a little bit iffy. That's, you know, that's home for me, right? And so when things start to get going good, I'm like, uh-oh, what's going to happen now? And I think some of this goes back to like when I was coming out of these flashbacks and things, I'd become so used to feeling this anxiety inside me that was, you know, ever present. When it started to go away, it got like, I would get scared. I'd be like, wait, I feel too good, right? I feel too good. So it kind of became like a Stockholm syndrome kind of thing, right? Where I was like, you know, I'm only okay when I'm in this, when I'm captive, you know, captivated by this.
Yeah, you know. And you're not unique in that either from people with trauma and even addiction. It's like waiting for that shoe to drop.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly right.
You know what's crazy to me, and like just taking it all in, is like you think about substance abuse and you think about mental health, right? And people look at it as like two different avenues. But like for me, there's so many similarities that you described, and again, it wasn't necessarily like, you know, the experience itself, but like what was going on in your head internally, and those thoughts and feelings like happened to me, right? And like I personally, like obviously have gone through and still continue to go through and continue to manage my mental health, but I never knew how close aligned they were, right? It's like, yes, like you weren't maybe struggling to, you know, you didn't need to use or drink, right? But you were dealing with it in another experience, but the mindset was still the same. And it's crazy. And it's like, why I bring that up, it's like when people call, and that's why I think APN is so unique, right? Because it has the ability to work with as a dual diagnosis facility, but also bring people together and see how common they are, because at the end of the day, it's all about community and build and being there for each other, right? And it's like, yes, you're here for mental health or trauma, I'm here for addiction, but we're still in it together, and we still can support each other and be here together. So I think it's like a unique environment that APN itself, the facility, has.
I would agree 100%. And in fact, you really, you know, opened up something there for me, because the group therapy was I was very resistant to the group therapy, and coming into APN. And I was thinking, look, I want more one-on-one. I was really hesitant because of this childhood stuff that I was uncovering. I'm like, you know, the shame that I had around it, I was like, I can't go and talk, you know, open up about this in group. Okay. And not really being you know, someone in recovery where, you know, to go to AA, I really like, and I'd gone to AA meetings with my brothers to be supportive of them over the years. And I really liked the community, but I was like, I don't really fit in this community, right? Like I hear these stories and I can empathize with them, but that's not me. But I'm like, I was kind of, without really knowing it, looking for a community, that
connection,
that spoke, you know, to me, and that had similar experiences to me. And so coming in, that was my biggest fear. And sitting in my room for 7 days, I was stewing about having to go into my group, right? When I finally got put into my group. And the first day in the group, 8 other men, I get introduced and have to, you know, say, you know, why I'm here kind of thing, right? And I just let it all out. And I'm bawling, right? I mean, Niagara Falls, okay? I am bawling, and I am opening up and telling things to 8 men that I've never seen before in my life, okay? And it was a massive, massive breakthrough. Oh. And it felt so good. Yeah. And every single one of those guys individually at the end of the first group session came up to me and said how blown away they were by my courage. Yeah. And I've never considered myself to be a courageous person. Sure. But they were like, I wished I had done that my first day.
Yeah, something moved you at that point in time.
It was
Absolutely.
right. I was full. Yeah. Okay, like my shame cup was
nowhere to go.
Was overflowing, and it just had to come out. Yeah. It had to come out, and I've learned so much about how vulnerability plays in, especially for all of us, but I think especially for it's particularly. It's something that men struggle with, right? Sure. Because we're not raised to be vulnerable, right? And I was reading one of Brené Brown's books, and she was talking about
third one.
I was about to say
3 in a row.
3 in a row. There you go. So she's a favorite.
Oh my God.
So she was talking about the link between vulnerability and courage, and she was doing some workshops with special forces, in the military, and she asked somebody what they thought, the number one thing you had to have in order to practice vulnerability. And some burly Navy SEAL stood up and said, you have to have courage. You cannot have any vulnerability without courage. Wow. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to do this, I kind of created this mantra for myself. Courage over comfort. Yeah. Instead of going to my comfortable place, my isolation place, my place where I can, not have to turn and face things. I'm going to turn and face it and practice courage when I can.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I would say moving to present times.
Yeah.
Right. How are you managing kind of the mental health now? How are you taking care of it? What are your is it community? Is it working with other professionals? What's helping you stay successful?
How long have you been at APN too?
I've been out of APN for about 16 months now.
Okay.
16, 17 months. Yeah. And how I manage it, there's a lot. There's a lot that goes into what I do to keep things on the rails. I do a couple different meetings. They're not AA meetings. One is the APN alumni meeting.
Shout out.
There you go, Andy.
Whoever hosts that must be the man.
Oh,
Shout out.
You can't believe it. Can't believe it. So that's that's a Zoom thing. So, but it's it's kind of a flow of different people coming and going. That's nice again because it's part of the community, right? It's people who have been in the same place that I've been in. And that was the other thing with the group thing that I really benefited from was, wow, look at all these people from different backgrounds, right? Different ages, different backgrounds, different lifestyles, all kind of talking about the same problems, right? And the same, and having seen the same results in their life. And wow, you realize that it's, you realize how much power there is in the group, because we can't do it alone. And I thought I could do it alone all this time, and then I realized I can't, and then I realized I don't have to, nor should I. So that's one thing I do. I do another men's group with another program associated with, again, not an AA meeting. There's some people in there are in SA or AA or NA,
ACAO, any of that?
So I do ACA.
Okay.
And ACA has been a big thing for me.
What is
so ACA is it stands for adult children of alcoholics and or dysfunctional families. So that's kind of was the big thing for me. And that was, again, a program, a book that I was introduced to that was a true aha moment for me. So ACA has what they call the laundry list of traits. And there's 14 traits that make up what they call an adult child. And let me qualify this. My parents are not alcoholics. There is alcoholism in both sides of my family, though, and so they both grew up around alcoholism. But the dysfunctional family thing, which is a key point of ACA, was definitely something that related to me. And some of the things, there's like 14, as I say, there's 14 traits, and I was a solid 8 of those. Yeah, I mean, I'm going down the list the first time going, oh my God, this is me. Check, check. Self-esteem issues, check. Like always worried about other people first before me. Isolation. you know, having, you know, trouble with, you know, authority figures, being addicted to excitement. These are all traits of that.
Sure.
And so that's another program that has really been helpful for me in a way. And they use what's called the Big Red Book in a way that the Blue Book just didn't speak to me.
Right.
And you know, so that's kind of my program, awesome. And it's been a huge help.
Right.
Yeah. I have a pretty random question, but it kind of direct too. Based off previous experiences, now that like weed's legalized, right, and people are going into shops on the street and buying weed, and like in some cities now it's like you can actually smoke weed on the street. Like, does that ever come into your mind? Like, you live in Denver, right? So it's like you're walking on the street and you see someone smoking. Like, how does that affect you still?
It doesn't anymore, but when it first went legal, it did, and it was kind of a problem for me. We call it the Colorado cologne, right? You walk around, you know, especially early on, you just walk around and you just smell the skunk, right? All over the place. And so that was a problem for me. And when I first moved out of Chicago when I was 38. I was splitting my time between Santa Fe and Southern Colorado, and I knew that coming to Colorado, like, it was a concern for me, like being around weed. You know, I mean, let's face it, it's not everywhere, right? You can get it anywhere, but it's tapered off. But when it was a problem for me, and so I had to kind of go through that again and do some more work around that when I first moved here. But I'm at the point now where I can, you know, where I can get through it. You know, like I'm going to see Widespread Panic at Red Rocks tomorrow, right? There's going to be weed everywhere.
Right,
okay.
Right.
There's going to be a lot of other shit too. Right. And I will be a little bit on edge, but that's all part of my growth program and part of my kind of exposure therapy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's amazing to hear, man.
You know, I got to get out of my comfort zone because otherwise I self-isolate and I go down that rabbit hole and you know,
no bueno.
Yeah, it's no good. No good at all. Yeah,
that's great. Well, really appreciate your time today,
Absolutely.
man.
This is great.
Very inspiring. I think a lot of people, again, our listeners will be a lot of alumni, but also current clients at the lodge. And I think that, like, again, people come here for a lot of different reasons, and probably some that are similar to yours where they can relate to. And I think, again, like, this is supposed to be inspirational. It's supposed to provide hope to the current clients and also alumni that are kind of are struggling with, you know, similar issues that you did. So I'm very happy you came in. I love talking to you and hearing your story. I'm just super appreciative and grateful.
Yeah, I agree. I've known Peter in the alumni program probably for a little over a year now, maybe even more, and to see his growth and just you know, because I hear it. We've talked about routine a lot, right? And almost becoming dependent completely on my routine. It's good because I'm now coping in a healthy way, right? And we've talked about that and how that's a good way to maintain balance and to see your growth and to see you here. Again, super grateful you came, and I think anyone that listens to this, mental health or addiction, could definitely learn and get some hope and inspiration. So shout out and great job, and yeah, that's what I got.
You're shouting at him. He's right here.
Shouting him out.
He's right
I've been
here.
shouting out people for 2
Yeah,
days
but he's
now.
like right here. You're supposed to shout out.
You got to give him the little Pittsburgh downtown. You know,
It's like if they're not here, you shout them out. You can just say thank you.
Stay in your lane, pal.
Right. But yeah, if you want to see other podcasts of ours or access this, I guess, in video content, please visit us at apn.com/podcast. That is apn.com/podcast. And if you want to communicate with us, we do have an email, and it's pod@apnlodge.com. That is pod@apnlodge.com. Thank you again, and we'll speak to you guys soon.
Thanks, Peter.